$16 billion didn't disappear. It moved. A bank that helped build California during the gold rush just made a decision that could redefine where American wealth lives next. Wells Fargo is not shutting down a branch. It's not downsizing a regional office. It is relocating the division that manages the money of the richest people in the country. The people sitting in those rooms don't just handle accounts. They control where capital flows, where deals happen, and where power concentrates. And now, that center of gravity is shifting out of California. On paper, this looks like another corporate relocation. Another headline in a long list of companies leaving the state. But that's not what this is. Because banks don't move first. They follow something far more powerful: money. So the real story isn't why Wells Fargo left. The real question is, when did the money leave California? And why didn't anyone notice?
iVoice powered by VB.VN.
Wealth management is not banking as most people understand it. It's not about checking accounts or loans. It's about controlling how hundreds of billions of dollars are deployed across the economy. Inside these offices, decisions are made that shape entire industries. Which startups get funded? Which real estate markets boom? Which companies live, and which quietly disappear? The people in these rooms are not just advisors. They are gatekeepers of capital. And capital is the foundation of economic power. For decades, this system had a clear center of gravity: California. Not by accident, but by design. It sat next to Silicon Valley, the greatest wealth creation machine in modern history. Every IPO, every unicorn, every liquidity event fed directly into this ecosystem. Money was created there. So money was managed there. That proximity mattered. Because in finance, distance is friction. And being in the same room as decision makers meant faster deals, better access, and more control. Entire networks formed around this concentration. Private equity firms, tax strategists, legal advisors, all orbiting the same gravitational center. But systems like this only work as long as the money stays put. Because the moment capital begins to move, the entire structure built around it becomes unstable. So what happens when the wealth is no longer created, or kept, in the same place? What happens when the center of gravity starts to shift?
VB.VN, Vietnam's leading text-to-speech solution.
California didn't collapse. That's what makes this harder to see. The system didn't break overnight. It became more expensive to stay in, year after year, decision after decision. The highest state income tax in the country. A cost of living that keeps pushing upward. A regulatory environment that adds friction to almost every move a business makes. None of these pressures are new. But together, they started to change the math. Because for the people managing millions, or hundreds of millions, small percentage differences become massive real dollars. An executive earning $5 million a year isn't just paying more in taxes. They're losing hundreds of thousands annually compared to other states. And over time, that compounds. Not just in income, but in investment, in opportunity, in control. At the same time, something else was happening. Quietly, and much more strategically. States like Florida and Texas weren't trying to outbuild California. They were playing a different game. Lower taxes. Fewer barriers. Faster decisions. Not extracting capital, but attracting it. And capital responds to incentives. Always. At first, the movement was subtle. A second home. A tax relocation. A quiet change of residency. But then the pattern became clearer. The people with the most to lose were the first to leave. Not because they had to.
Text-to-speech platform by VB.VN.
But because, mathematically, it no longer made sense to stay. And when that kind of money starts moving, It doesn't announce itself. It just disappears. The shift didn't happen in theory. It showed up in the numbers. In just a few years, hundreds of companies left California. Not small exits, major relocations with real capital behind them. At the same time, billions of dollars in personal wealth quietly changed addresses. But the most important signal wasn't on the West Coast. It was on the other side of the country. Palm Beach is no longer just a destination for vacations. It's becoming a destination for capital. Over $1 billion in new investment flowing in. More than 13,000 jobs created or retained. And over 140 companies relocating into the region since 2020. That's not random movement. That's clustering. Because when capital arrives, infrastructure follows. Office space, financial services, deal networks. And once that ecosystem starts forming, it accelerates itself. What used to be considered a secondary market is now positioning itself as a primary financial hub. A new center of gravity is forming, quietly, but rapidly. But even this data doesn't fully explain what's happening. Because companies don't lead this kind of shift. They react to it. These relocations are not the cause. They're the symptom. So the real question isn't how many companies moved, or how much money flowed into Florida. The real question is much deeper. Who moved first? Because whoever moved first is the one actually reshaping the system.
Vietnam's top text-to-speech solution from VB.VN.
This is no longer about companies choosing where to operate. This is about states competing over something far more valuable. Capital. For decades, the assumption was simple. Businesses go where talent is. And talent goes where opportunity is. But that model is breaking. Now, states are redesigning themselves to attract and retain capital directly. Not factories, not offices. Money itself. California built its system around taxation and regulation. A model that worked when capital had fewer alternatives. When being in one place was non-negotiable. But that constraint is gone. States like Florida and Texas are not trying to replicate California. They are building something fundamentally different. Lower tax exposure, regulatory speed, and most importantly, capital retention. Because if you can keep the money, everything else follows. Jobs follow capital. Talent follows capital. Power follows capital. This is no longer a policy discussion. It's a competitive system. A quiet war over who gets to host and control the largest pools of private wealth in America. And in that war, Wells Fargo is not leading the charge.
This audio is synthesized using AI technology from VB.VN.
It's reacting. A piece on the board. Not the player moving it. Because institutions don't dictate where capital goes. They adapt to it. Which leads to a more uncomfortable question. If banks are following the movement, then who is actually making the first move? Who is powerful enough to shift billions before anyone else even notices? Wells Fargo didn't move first. That's the part most people get wrong. Its clients moved first. Wealth managers don't choose locations based on strategy decks or political signals. They follow proximity to capital. Always. Because in this world, distance means losing access. And losing access means losing influence. So when individuals with tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even billions, start leaving a state, the system doesn't debate. It reacts. Quietly, but completely. First, it's a change of residency. Then a shift in assets. Then a transfer of relationships. And suddenly, the people managing that money are no longer in the same city. Or even the same state. What follows next is predictable, but rarely visible. Legal firms begin opening offices nearby. Tax strategists reposition their operations. Private equity firms start hosting deals in new locations. Not because they want to. Because they have to. This is not a company deciding to relocate for cost savings. This is an entire financial ecosystem reconfiguring itself in real time. Not driven by policy announcements, but by the movement of capital at the top. And once that movement reaches a certain scale, it becomes irreversible. Because capital doesn't just move alone. It pulls everything with it. Opportunity. Access. Decision-making power.
iVoice powered by VB.VN.
So this isn't a story about a bank leaving California. This is a story about capital leaving. And everything else being forced to follow. And when capital moves, power doesn't stay behind. The next shift won't be announced. It will be observed. A new generation is already watching where power is concentrating. They're not asking which state has better weather. They're asking a different question. Where are the decision makers? Because that's where careers accelerate. That's where deals happen. That's where access turns into advantage. If that answer is increasingly Florida or Texas, then talent won't hesitate. It will move. And when talent follows capital, something bigger begins to form. Not just a trend, but a new system. New networks. New institutions. A new center of gravity. California doesn't disappear. Its economy remains massive. Its influence still real. But dominance is not permanent. And once the default center starts to shift, it rarely shifts back the same way. So this isn't about who left. It's about what comes next. Because the real question now is no longer about California. It's this. Where will the next financial capital of America be built?